Hello, Francesco.
Hello.
Francesco's here to help me. If something happens to me, I fall under the chair, break my leg, he will take over. So I think people are joining. We'll just put the participants so I can see the attendees. We're just waiting a couple of minutes so that everybody can connect and join. So it takes a minute or two to have everybody connected. And then I will introduce everybody. And get it. Okay. One minute more. Well, I will start with the introductions. I think there will be a lot more people connecting, but it seems it will take a moment. So I will explain what this event is about and who the speakers are, and then we will start very quickly. So welcome to this webinar on the, sorry, I see that there are other people connecting with your name. Damien, these are your assistants, but it's fine.
I have multiple identities.
They're all using your link as speaker, which is a little problem, but it doesn't matter as long as they don't interfere. So we have, then you see, that's it. You managed to become get elected 4 times to the parliament. That's not the problem.
And with the same name, imagine.
Yes. Well, that's it. That you have multiplied your voting power. No, anyway, so thank you for coming. I mean, we have 3 speakers today. This is more. This has to be quite free. I know it's a webinar, but the idea is that afterwards people can actually intervene. I think, Damien, you may have to leave a bit earlier than the whole. I have put 1.5 hours so that if people have a lot of questions and discussions, we can do. But if you have to leave, that's fine. I mean, that's not a problem. So we have first Damien Böselager, who is a Member of Parliament, deeply involved in the budget, following very closely the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and he has been thinking very, very hard what to do with whatever comes from now onwards. We have war in Ukraine, we have the gas tensions and the prices going up. The question is, what does this mean? Or is there any need to act and particularly prepare in advance, if possible, before we get hit on the head? So the question is, he will present this his position on this. After this, we have Daniel Gross, who has been working. He's a distinguished fellow of CEPS. He has been director of CEPS until recently. He's in the board, and he is working very hard on these issues too, and he's going to give his views and the work is done in analyzing the implications and what can be done in the future, and what he has been looking very carefully at the energy prices. And then we have Lalia Rubio. She has worked, I mean, she's a specialist on the budget, and she will speak about how to prepare also the financial architecture and the EU budget and the instruments attached to it for situations like the ones we are facing. It will be a bit more open in the sense of being a more, how to create a system that is able to handle not only this, but a number of other cases. So she will give her views on that, and we also will have time then for discussions and comments from participants. If you have something to say, you can lift your hand later so that you will be able to express it, or otherwise we can you can actually put questions on the chat. You have a question answer chat. So let's start. Damian, I would say the floor is yours. Can you give us your views and explain what is in your mind on all of these issues that we are facing?
Absolutely, Jorge. I shared a presentation with you. I don't know if you can pull that up or if I have to do that.
Maybe I didn't see it yet. Sorry. Yes, but the one that you're sending. Yes, sorry.
We can share it for you if you wish.
That would be fantastic because I'm on like an iPad and I'm not 100% certain how to do this.
Fine.
Or you give me sharing rights and then I can also try. Okay, perfect. I'll start by saying, like, obviously, if you talk about the macroeconomic you know, of fiscal architecture of the European Union, there's many elements that you can talk about. Yeah? I mean, you can think about how the debt rules work with the Stability and Growth Pact, with the semester recommendations, with the potential, you know, permanent investment tool, and so on. But what I decided that I would like to show you today and discuss a bit today about when looking about the future is the more immediate needs that currently evolve without changing the structure so much at this point. And actually, together with Johannes, my assistant, and Giuseppe, who are also both here, I think, as Damian Böselagers, we have thought actually from the beginning of the war about the fact that there might be adverse economic consequences of what's happening on the different member states and in different ways. So, I mean, one way to think about this is that obviously there's a different reliance on Russian resources, but also on dependency when it comes to exports to Russia. And then, yeah, then there's obviously the whole inflationary context, which we are currently seeing, and the issue that there will be effects on borrowing costs, and I will come to this. So if you go to the next slide, what we looked at is how the European Commission, it's the blue lines, has been adapting their economic forecasts. And you can see that there has been a strong adaptation of economic forecasts for Slovakia, and you know, positive adaptation for the Netherlands. In the yellow bubbles, you can see the same for the OECD, and in the red bubbles, you can see the energy import, let's say the Russian import share in the energy mix of that particular country. What does this slide tell us? The Commission has been constantly adapting their forecasts negatively, and we think that it will actually, that they will need to adapt continuously even more. We don't believe that this crisis is over at all, but that there will be a more serious economic downturn coming. And we have been trying to say this, and the reason why we have the slide now is to show them every time that, you know, that they are actually, that they need to adapt potentially further, and that they always said, no, it's going to be fine, but then had to adapt. What's clear is that the Russian energy mix is not the only driving factor, but there are other factors, obviously, like inflation and debt to GDP that play a role here. Then we can see that the borrowing costs were obviously increasing in the different member states, and you can see that's because of an overall Eurozone risk. So that's why you see the German yield increase, and the spread of you know, the EU average over that German yield increase is not that great. But if you look at the next slide, actually, can you go one further? Sorry. You can see that that there is a differentiation in the different countries on the borrowing costs. So on the right-hand side, you see the German increase, and then on the left-hand side, you can see all the countries that had a higher increase in their borrowing costs. And you can see that Hungary, Romania, Poland, so the Eastern European countries, which are very much exposed to Russia, have seen like higher increase in borrowing costs than potentially some other countries. If you go to the next slide, and what our argument then is that what happens if you have increasing borrowing costs, but you also have an increased unemployment rate potentially, and so increased social spending, if you want, is that you cut on investment, because that's like the one factor that you can control for. And if you have no fiscal space, then like the way to ensure that your budget is still functioning is by cutting investment. If you go to the next slide, we did an analysis of what happened in the PIGS country, even though I don't like this name so much, in between 2009 and 2014, and you can see that basically investment dropped by 46%. Public investment dropped by 46%. And in terms of investment to GDP or public investment to GDP ratio, you can see that there was a big decrease in many of the member states as well. So to just underline our argument. So this brings us back to the argument that we believe that you need some form of European measure to counterweigh these effects if you don't want to go into a serious economic recession, especially in some member states, but then affecting the whole Eurozone and the EU level as a whole. And for us, this is done by protecting investment, strategic investment that we believe are necessary. That could be, the energy independence investment that we sorry. That we're currently talking about in REPowerEU, which I will also be negotiating, but that could also be other green and digital investment or resilience investments, which we try to fight for in the RRF a lot, which we could say that could be refinanced by the EU level. Why do I say refinanced? Obviously, one slide that we're still working on is the whole slide on inflation. Yeah? I mean, we are working in an inflationary environment currently, and so what we don't think makes sense is to necessarily have fiscal expansion right now in countries where we have, or especially in sectors where we see high levels of inflation. But what could make sense is to basically safeguard the investments that we find strategic by refinancing them via the European level. In a funny way, this is exactly the opposite that I was arguing for in the RRF, where I really didn't like that, already existing stimulus packages were refinanced with EU money. But here in this context, I think we should do exactly that. We should refinance the investments that we want to safeguard from being cut, which will obviously also increase the fiscal space for the country as a whole. And the way to do this, I mean, this is just a rough idea, but in the end, we would say that you should continue using the 122 treaty paragraph as the article as a basis. So basically build an EURI or NGEU kind of instrument. And then do the allocation according to where the GDP drop and increase in borrowing costs is the highest, and where there's a high reliance on Russian imports and energy sources. And then, maybe take into account also the FDI and exports to FDI from Russia and exports to Russia, or even also to Belarus. This is a bit our proposal. This is very much focused now internally. I also have thoughts on what we should do in terms of reconstruction in Ukraine, but I will not go into details there. I mean, maybe this is a food for thought for you and for everyone. Currently, I can tell you that from the more political discussion that I'm having is that obviously the German finance ministry is not super inclined to think about new funds. They all say, let's look RRF, let's look into the RRF money. But I mean, if you see the borrowing costs rising, you know that the loans will be used up quite fast in the different member states. So if you have the assumption that basically the remaining loans of those countries that have a higher refinancing cost than the cost of the European loans will be, then and if they take the loans out, then you don't have anything left in the RRF. Basically, I think this I would have to ask Jans, but I think it's around 50 billion that would then still be remaining, which is not sufficient to deal with the current situation. But it's true that the political reality currently is not in a way yet there where we are discussing it. I think with this I can stop. I'm happy to answer any questions and thoughts. I hope this was stimulating for all of you.
Sorry. Thank you for this presentation. So the issue here is about do we need to have to prepare for worsening situation? That is one of the questions. I have to say, by the way, that the EU itself borrowing cost seems to be growing. When I see the latest borrowing from for the RRF for the next generation EU, the interest rates was going from negative to now positive, and one of them is even getting to 3%. It's quite interesting. This is the EU borrowing. This is the latest data from this month. We are putting this on our website. We have all the borrowings there now, everyone with all the maturities. But now I would like to pass the word to Daniel. You have been looking at all of this and you think a lot about how the economy ticks and it's moving and the prices and energy. So you can please feel free to say your position on that.
Yes, many thanks also to Damian for this very interesting presentation. And my role is today to be critical, an academic critical. And I will make some points on the economics of it as I see it. Let me first add to something where you ended on the Ukraine story. My view is that here the German government is making a big mistake. This is a war, and for a war you can have that's a transitory expense, so you can have higher debt. It's a common EU interest, and I think EU is shamefully behind in providing financial assistance to Ukraine. This is not a time where you can say, can we save a few millions here or there, and right? This is okay. We agree on this. This is all in, right? If you lose the war, that's it, right? So, okay, this is completely mistaken. This is Pennyfuchserei, as they say in German, which really should be condemned. Okay, so we agree on this one. Okay, I also liked one particular slide of you where you say that the increase in the borrowing cost was mainly in the German increase rates, right? I totally agree with that. By the way, this is a technical thing. When the ECB increases its rates, the effective cost of the borrowing will increase further because of the vast amount of bonds financed by debt issued by the ECB, right? We agree on the economics of it. It's not visible yet, but it'll come, right? And I think the data just mentioned by Jorge on the increase in the EU borrowing cost is very interesting, because basically we had this idea, or we had this solution, quote unquote solution for the RRF by putting it in the indefinite future, right? Thinking money is free and we have zero interest rates, so we'll never have to repay it. And now if we get interest rates, let's say of 3%, then that will be changed, okay? But that problem will come into the future. Let me deal more with some of the ideas which I heard right now. And there's one idea which I hear recurrently, which in my view is wrong. And that is that the impact of the current energy crisis is determined to a large extent by how much a country imports of its gas from Russia. As long as we have an internal market with the same price of gas, it doesn't really matter whether you got your stuff, your gas in the past from Russia or not, because the marginal cost of gas is equal to the LNG price. Right? There might be a few things here and there, some transportation costs, and the Iberian Peninsula might be somewhat partially disconnected. But remember, Spain also depends on LNG imports. And if an LNG tanker comes towards Europe and the Spaniards are bidding for a much lower price than somebody in Rotterdam or in Germany, it will go north. So the Spanish gas price cannot be decoupled for a long time from the rest of Europe. Of course, if you have a physical shortage because Russia just cuts off today and we have not enough interconnectors and LNG imports, then we might have some divergences. But I think the key issue is that we keep the internal market for gas. And as long as we do that, the impact of the high current gas prices will be proportional to the amount of gas imports relative to GDP. And this is different from Russian gas, let's say relative to GDP, or the share of gas you got from Russia. And if you do that statistic, actually you see that Spain is very highly exposed. So the ratio of gas imports to Spanish GDP is higher than for Germany, for example. And that's, I think, also why you see all this these political problems in Spain. So, and let me just, I have said it 3 times, but go away from just saying it depends on how much gas you got from Russia. It depends how much gas you import, basically relative to your economy. And that gives a very different picture. And by the way, we are seeing the oil price going down. I mean, I'm not an oil price expert, right? But if we have a global recession, I could see the oil price really falling a lot, and therefore the pressure on the European economy diminishing. I'm saying diminishing, not going away. And it might be mainly a problem for gas, mainly for 9 months. And then my view is that after that, if the oil price stays low, the gas price, which is linked to them via Asian power production and electricity generation, which could be oil, gas, or coal, and therefore, so keep in mind, our main source of gas in the short run is Asia, LNG from Asia. LNG not used in Japan because of a high price. So I think that's very important. That has implications also for the investment spending for the green transition. I think we both, Demi and I, will agree that the high energy prices actually make the investment in renewables more profitable for private sector. So actually, you could argue that you need to do less from the public sector, right? And therefore, I would say I'm very doubtful that from the present level, we need even higher public investment for the green transition. I'm not saying we should cut the present level, but even more, I don't think is desirable. And we see already in a number of countries, I think, Damien, you mentioned that partially, that you are at the supply limit. So even more spending would probably increase, yes, in more spending, but mostly into higher prices and not much more effective public sector infrastructure. So I would say I don't see a need for increasing public sector investment spending. And therefore, I don't really see the need for an additional European investment fund to, as you said, refinance additional. I don't know whether you meant to say that you want to refinance existing investment spending, but since governments already get, I think you have it partially in your slide, but I couldn't quite make it out, get much higher revenues through higher nominal GDP, they have enough, right? Of course, governments now say we have to protect consumers. And here, that is something which is key for me. As Europe, we cannot protect consumers from the loss of purchasing power from higher energy prices, even if they go a bit lower than the very high level reached a couple of days and weeks ago. Because this is something we have to pay to foreigners. There's no way around it. And the only thing the government can do is to redistribute that burden. How? Okay, it promises lower energy prices in some countries to consumers, and then it has to increase taxes on the same consumers. So it's just, and then I think for many consumers it will be a wash. Of course, they see the direct income and they don't see the higher taxes they have to pay either today or tomorrow. So the key thing in our response is not so much more EU spending or refinancing infrastructure spending. It is that through state aid rules and others, the EU makes sure that there's no price mitigation. to say it clearly and unpolitically. You can give, for example, poor household vouchers, but tradable vouchers for a certain amount of kilowatt hours, right? But the key thing is that everybody sees the correct price which we are paying in Europe, right? And energy, after all, is 5% of our economy, so this cannot kill budgets overall. And therefore, I would say this inflationary period should be used to, as they say in German, consolidate public finances, make sure that the debt ratios can actually go down because of higher nominal GDP, and protect, of course, the most vulnerable consumers, but make sure that everybody sees the correct high price, which is a price which we pay to foreigners and which we cannot mitigate. Let me stop here.
Okay, thank you. So in other words, I think that in a nutshell, you really are a bit, I would call it concerned that putting money into investment as a problem with additionality, because the private sector has incentives to invest in renewables. So if you just give them more money, it doesn't mean that they will invest less in renewables. That's number one. The second is that inflation is created not by monetary policy, but by real facts. That is the energy.
So that's different. I mean, at present, right?
Yes. Now,
the price inflation right now is mainly, right?
Yeah, this is because Lagarde was saying it recently, that intervening to counteract a price increase due to a cost increase, not due to other factors, means that it's distortive. So it would mean that you are actually killing a bit the idea. Like, for example, if you try to increase expenditure to avoid the price signal to go through, you're not improving the situation. You're actually making people also use more energy because they're actually getting money for it, and then you have even a worse energy situation. So these are the two aspects, I think, that's coming from you, to be careful about the instruments you're using because they may backfire. This is your point, I think. So I will, because we have a bit, we are on time. I would like to see Lalia, you appeared and disappeared. I know your connection is not very good, unfortunately, because you are away, and we are here now. Actually, the image is good, so let's hope that
I don't dare to stay on the screen because I think it's really low. I have a very big problems with my Wi-Fi, so I'm sorry to disappear, and I'm not sure I will be able to do all the intervention without being interrupted. So forgive me in advance if it doesn't work very well, because I haven't been able even to follow all the interventions. But anyway, I think I will try to present some very short ideas. We switch a bit of subject because I am not going to talk about the impact of the current crisis. I will take more long-term approach, or medium long-term approach, and I will make some reflections on whether our EU budgetary system is prepared to respond to crisis. What can we learn after all these crises we have suffered these latest decades, and the last one is the Ukrainian one. So the question is if the EU budgetary governance actually is fit for purpose in this sense. And I think I can start with something which I think everybody will agree with me, that the crises are now becoming a new normal, and we realize that the EU budget is quite rigid and unfit to react to crisis. So what we have seen in the latest crisis, since the Eurozone crisis, is that there is a kind of modus operandi to react to crisis at the EU level. We first try to mobilize all available resources, which are very tiny amounts of budget. We know that even with the mobilization of margins and the flexibility provisions, we cannot do much. And then we go to create off-budget instruments, because it's the only way we can react at the EU level. Sometimes we create them totally unconnected from the EU budget, and other times they are connected with the EU budget. So we create like NGU, like SURE, we create debt finance instruments that are guaranteed by the EU budget. So as I say, I repeat because I think you lost me a bit, maybe. Sometimes we create things totally out of the EU budget, like ESM. Sometimes we create debt finance instruments backed by the EU budget, and sometimes also another way of reacting to crises in the last crisis has been to create what we call in our study, Jorge, hybrid instruments. That is, instruments in which we merge a bit of EU budget funds with contributions from member states, ad hoc contributions from member states, and contributions from other donors. And this is the case of the trust funds. This is the case of the facility for refugees in Turkey we put into place in response to the migration crisis. This is also the modus operandi that the Commission wants to apply to the creation of this new health authority, the so-called area. And this was also partly the approach we took to finance vaccines in the last crisis. And this is probably the modus operandi we will use to create the facility for the reconstruction of Ukraine. So the question is, and let me know if you don't hear me well, because
we hear you very well.
Okay, because sometimes I have a message that your network is not working very well.
No, we have heard everything. Don't worry.
Okay, so the question is, well, the result of this, you know it very well, is this galaxy of instruments that we portray in our study. And the question is this a problem or not, or is it just inevitable because we have a budget that is limited, and changing the budget, creating a very big budget, we know that is unrealistic politically. So I would say it is a problem in two senses. From the perspective of effectiveness, it's a problem because even with this pragmatic way of doing, we are still slow in reacting to crisis. If we create debt financed instruments like ESM, these are almost always subjected to unanimity to be activated. So we need the unanimous vote of finance ministers to use them. If we create NGU type instruments, we need always to increase this own resource ceiling to create more space to guarantee these instruments with EU budget, and that is even more complicated because we need the ratification at the national level. So we are not very quick in reacting to crisis neither. And apart from the effectiveness problem, there are problems of political accountability. Of budget operations are always more complex to report and difficult to estimate the fiscal cost because they create some contingent liabilities. And on top of that, many off-budget instruments have been created by the Council alone. When we use the 122 article that Damian mentioned, it's only the Council that decides. So we lose a bit, the Parliament loses the power as legislative authority to decide on that. The proceeds of these new EU finance instruments, while the Parliament does not have a say when they are used to finance normal expenditure, let's say in the EU budget. Neither the Parliament has a say on the voluntary contributions of member states to some hybrid instruments. Now, someone could say, well, this is a bit inevitable, and it happens a bit the same at the national level. It's true that if we look at the fiscal packages launched to respond to COVID, there were, I mean, of course, member states put into place supplementary budgets, but they also resort a lot to off-budget instruments, and mainly loans and guarantee instruments, schemes for firms. So it's not something unique at the EU level to go to off-budget instruments. On top of that, at the national level, also when we use emergency budgetary legislation, sometimes that allows finance ministers also to adopt things without having to wait for an ex-ante approval of the parliamentary. So in some sense, some of the things we also see it at the national level, but there are differences. The first main difference is that debt financing, of course, at the national level is normal procedure, and it's not off budget, and therefore parliaments decide on how to use this decide on the level of debt ceilings when they are adopted through legal acts, and decide on how to use the proceeds of this debt. Secondly, when you look at, I mean, the OECD, for instance, has done quite a nice comparison of what has been done at the national level for COVID. And when you look at these loan guarantee schemes that have been adopted, in most of the case, they have been adopted through legal acts. And therefore, the legislature also was involved in the creation of these schemes, namely putting the overall ceiling and the conditionality and levels of maximum support per firm and so on and so forth, which is not the case, as I said, with some debt finance instruments at the EU level based on 122. And I would add, it's not the case for some hybrid instruments also. For instance, the famous facility for refugees in Turkey, it was decided by the Council alone without the Parliament having a say on, the design of the instrument. And third, at national level also, we see some awareness of the need to improve the reporting of these off-budget operations and the need to have better information on fiscal risks and estimates on contingent liabilities, how might affect national annual budgets in the future. So overall, it makes sense also to put ourselves this question, whether it's not only something for the short term. Of course, in the short term, I mean, I think we have to be pragmatic and react to the crisis as using the business as usual way we have done, like meaning mobilizing, as we have already done, all the margins we can, and then putting into place off-budget instruments. And there are today currently 2 of them under discussion. This big MFP macro financial package to provide liquidity to the Ukrainian government of 9 billion, and this facility, both of them are off-budget instruments, of course. So of course we have to do it right now like this, but it makes sense to open the question to the medium or long term, whether we have to think about a different way of organizing the EU finances and to go towards something more similar to the national level, even though we have, of course, to take into account of the particularities of the EU level. And for instance, we do not have full, tax sovereignty is mainly at national level, so we cannot envisage from one day to the other to change this. So taking this into account, I would say, and I will conclude with this, I would say I see two different paths, so two different ways of advancing. One more moderate path of reform, and another one that would be a more ambitious path of reform. The moderate one would be just to increase or to improve to the maximum the flexibility in the current budget. We can do a bit better than we do now. We can strengthen the existing flexibility instruments, and more importantly, maybe something that we haven't exploited, I think, to the maximum. We can create more inbuilt flexibility in some programs. For instance, it makes no sense, even if it's a very tiny amount of money, it makes no sense that the migration funds are mostly pre-allocated. I mean, it would be much logical to have the few amount of money we have at the EU level for immigration to be really crisis related, and used according to the needs, to the short-term needs, and not pre-allocated as it is now according to 2 years before data on influx of migrants. That's just an example. A more important debate in the future is on cohesion. How much flexible, whether we have to institutionalize a bit the latest use of cohesion as a flexible instrument. I mean, we have to realize that it has been the case with CARE, it has been the case with CRE in COVID, or we have to reject this use of cohesion. That's an open question. I think we have to discuss and clarify for the next MFF. So that would be the moderate reform, plus better reporting of all these off-budget operations, and better reporting of fiscal risk. Today, if you look at the reporting, the reports that the Commission prepares and passes to the Parliament, it can be better. I mean, we can do better than that. Normally, for instance, for off-budget instruments, the Commission reports the overall ceiling, the overall use, but we don't really have an estimate on which type of contingent liabilities can fall in the next years. We don't have anything like this. So I think they could do better. They could be more transparent in a sense. An ambitious reform would be to integrate all possible off-budget instruments into the EU budget, all possible because some of them are not possible to integrate it. The peace facility, we would need to reform the treaty. But for instance, the modernization fund, it makes no sense to have outside the EU budget. Of course, it is financed by ETS proceeds, but it can perfectly be inside the EU budget, and that would allow the Parliament and the Court of Auditors to have a look on how we use this money that I remind to those who do not know that is used for some member states for let's say low-income member states to decarbonize their economies. So some of these off-budget instruments could be inside the EU budget, and then a more ambitious reform would be, well, two other ones. Another one would be to give some say to the Parliament on the use of external assigned revenues, and particularly when the use of external assigned revenues many things are now classified as external assigned revenues, and they are not of the same nature. Some things are clearly genuinely external, like contributions from third countries into certain programs, and of course in this case it makes no sense to give a say to the Parliament. It's the UK or it's Norway who decides how much they want to put in one program. The same to a certain extent for ETS revenues. They are very volatile and they depend on the carbon cost, so it's not something that has to be agreed every year. But we put the same category things that make no sense not to give a say to the Parliament. One is the use of proceeds from debt when they are used to strengthen or to complete some budgetary programs. Why the Parliament cannot decide how we distribute this part of NGU that goes to different programs. And the other one is when we use hybrid instrument as a way of bypassing the difficulties to increase programs within the EU budget. And sometimes we see the Commission proposing hybrid instruments in which all member states participate. In some sense, this is a substitute to just increasing the EU budget and financing these new programs with the EU budget. So in this case, I think the Parliament should also have a say on that, because otherwise we are just fragmenting, we're just putting outside the EU budget many things that normally would, if they are financed by all member states, they should be financed with the normal EU budget. So I think I stop here. Yeah, and the third, more ambitious, just to finalize, would be to institutionalize sort of EU debt capacity to raise debt in case of crisis. Now, that of course, that creates a lot of problems. As I said, we have to be aware of the fact of the distribution of competences in taxation. But I think we could imagine something more swifter, more agile, and at the same time, endowed with more political parliamentary control. And one way of doing this would be to increase but of course, that would require unanimity and agreement among member states, but to significantly increase the on-resource ceiling, so that we create a lot of space, and then to set up a procedure to set up these new debt instruments based on majority, on absolute majority in the Council plus majority in the Parliament, something a bit, balanced among the two institutions and less, and less difficult to put into place, like the unanimity and ratification. What it makes no sense is that each time we need to put into place a new instrument, we have to pass through this ratification. Member states could maybe agree on a more significant increase of the on-resource ceiling, and then this swifter procedure to create ad hoc debt finance instruments in case of new crisis. And now I truly stop here. Thanks.
Thank you. Jorge. Well, the whole point, in fact, that we are thinking is, should we not have a budget that is more agile and flexible? In part, we can see if you think about the size of the budget and the size of the budget of the US federal budget 100 years ago, you will see has a similar development based on needs. You will have it increased over time. And the question is how to do that, and do we need it, and how far do we go? And you have presented these kind of reforms. Some of them are very, very important, but the question is, do we have actually an ability now, if there is something hitting us in a few months, how good are we going to be able to create whatever is needed if there is something coming? That's one of the issues. Do we need again to wait for many months before we can act at EU level? And is there a way to avoid that everything is done making things more complicated? But now let's go open a bit more the debate. First of all, we will see, you can start putting questions. I will just use them, but do we have a reaction, especially Damien, on the three aspects? I know you didn't agree on some of the points that Daniel was putting, so I want to hear your position and how you think the future is going to go.
Yeah, so first on the flexibilization of the budget, but I also see Francesco raise his hand, so I don't know if you want to take it.
Yeah, but he's more a moderator. He's he's not allowed to speak. Maybe after with the questions and answers.
Okay. So on the flexibilization, I obviously agree with Eulalia and also with parliamentary oversight, and that like this kind of off-budget instrument, how do you say this, lacks any form of, I think, structural oversight that works. I mean, for me, just my personal example is that I remember I was in Greece in the financial crisis, and people coming to me and say, like, what is this ESM thing? Like, how are the power structures here and how does it work? And so I think so. I'm not the biggest fan of these kind of structures. But on the questions of Daniel, I mean, for me, the question is, what's the goal? What's the underlying goal? My goal is not to push consumption, and then maybe I wasn't clear enough about this. Like, my interest here is not in saying, hey, we need to do Keynesian kind of intervention to somehow have multiplier effects and so on. That's not at all. My goal is twofold. One is to ensure that climate investments are on track. And that the reason here is just that, like, as I said, if you have less money as a state, you will go and try to cut where possible. And that could also mean for a lot of the countries with less fiscal space that they will also cut on climate investments. And I think if we start doing this, Repower is doing this also to an extent to think that we have time on the climate side just because other pressures are coming. I think we misunderstand the climate crisis. And the second point is that the second goal is to ensure fiscal space overall. And this comes from the perspective that I am not so certain that we have the automatic stabilizers already in place in the European Union, and especially in the Eurozone, to deal with the diverging financial crisis and fiscal space crisis or budgetary crisis or debt crisis in our union. And that's why I think at some point there will be a need to ensure that basically all the member states have sustainable kind of budgets, and that's the second goal. And this goes hand in hand with the question of, what does it mean to refinance investments, and why do we think that there's a difference to just financing some form of consumption measures? I think so. You said that, look, for businesses, it's super simple now to invest into the energy transition because they, suddenly it makes sense financially. But the issue is that many of these businesses that should do that are heavily reliant on energy currently, and their energy cost structure has completely deteriorated. So if your cost structure has 30% of your, let's say, costs in energy, now suddenly that jumped because it doubled. Any potential margin that you could have is wiped out. So for you to now think about how to invest best in a I don't know, energy efficient pump or something like this, is like, and this with a 5-year whatever kind of investment period, that's just not a realistic scenario, I think, for many of these companies right now. So. And while the incentive has increased, I think also the wiggle room for many of these businesses has decreased. Then obviously when it comes to businesses that actually do alternative energy production, that might have, your point might hold. Yeah? I mean, there might be more incentives. And I think there is also where you see the most bottlenecks right now when it comes to like solar panels, when it comes to any form of other energy production facilities, or even the warm pumps or whatever you call them. So I think we have to be a bit specific about what kind of sectors in the energy transition we talk about. And the key for us is that refinancing, targeted investment, and potentially also pushing for reform at the same time, which the RRF did as well, could actually help unlock some of these bottlenecks and could ensure that we ensure some form of going in the right direction while weathering the energy crisis, while dealing with the fact that we have an energy dependence that we need to reduce. And so I don't agree with you that we can just put this into the same kind of level of currently we're in a context. So one last word on this, on inflation. Inflation doesn't affect the fiscal space for us. I mean, we can probably need to do some decent analysis about this. But yes, your nominal income increases because you have, nominally more cash flowing into your pockets. But I can see it. I get paid by public money, and the automatic adjustment to my if you want, recompensation is insane. Yeah, it goes one by one also into the public budgets when it comes into spending. So I'm not sure that I would have to look at the data, but I'm not sure that inflation really plays such a massive role when it comes to the fiscal space question, because the dollar that you spend will also be less worth when it comes to on the spending side of the public sector. Okay, so that's my quick reaction, but I'm very much looking forward to further discussions and questions.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, what you said, in fact, to summarize a little bit, what you were saying is targeted investments, and be aware that the cost of capital goes up and cost of production for some of the sectors that should do the renewables, so that maybe they have of the companies, so that maybe not everybody can jump into the business so easily as because of they are also dependent on affected by the inflation and the cost. So you would support the companies that feel themselves unable to respond to the demand. Let's say that's a bit what you're saying. It's a bit difficult to choose one by one. That's maybe the issue. Now I would just say if Daniel has some last words, and then we go a bit into the questions that I'm getting here on the some are appearing on the chat. But let's see, Daniel, do you have any comments?
I concede to Damien that yes, it's true that the inflation has also leads to higher costs, higher outlays for the government. I would say it should not be proportional because we have a terms of trade loss. Right, you have perhaps seen the estimates of the ECB. The higher energy and commodity prices cost the Eurozone at least 4% of GDP. And Eurozone exporters have been able to increase their prices by enough to neutralize more than 1/2 of it, 2/3. So what still remains is a terms of trade loss for the EU of around 2 percentage points of GDP. And that means purchasing power of everybody has to be reduced. There's no way you can avoid that, right? This is just from the war. And that is, I think, a message which only some governments have accepted. Okay, we agree.
I agree on that. I mean, that's why I think Scholz is disinforming the German public.
Okay, and I concede also that you're right that that some of the cost structure of renewables has also gone up. If the risk premium goes up, then the cost of capital goes up. So that might counteract some of the increase in let's say electricity prices, right, which serve as the main price signal. Of course, there the special taxes in Spain and so on don't help, right? Because basically the signal is if prices stay very high, we get taxed, and if prices stay low, we take the losses, right? So one has to be very careful with these windfall taxes. But I concede that. But I don't see the danger for public sector infrastructure, especially green infrastructure financing, because this stuff has been launched now. The money is available from the EU, so I don't see any danger for that being interrupted. Right. So that's why I don't really see the big need. But if you want to refinance some existing expenditure, fine with me. That's not the key problem. I also want to say I very much agree with Lalia that the budget should be reformed in the long run, but first we have to get through this winter. We have to help Ukraine. and that means we have to take on some additional work.
Yes, thank you. Now I see here a question. This is a bit long on the chat, which is about Italy, the RRF, and Italy getting the money. And then there is the article of Der Spiegel, Vertrauensvotum, Italiens Regierung droht das aus. So there is an article about Italy having problems to, in a certain way, the use of the funding and the reforms and all the mixture of it. So they seem to member states and institutions are falling short of their tasks. That's one of the comments that I see there. So is there enough strength and political movement to actually implement? I think the question is really the implementation and the reforms, because we are like saying, yeah, we'll have to finance infrastructure and then in exchange of other reforms. And I think this is the problem about the theoretical best and the actual mass implementation of thinking that you can focus the money on certain investments and then hope the member states don't have the temptation to then deviate with that money into another direction once they have it in their hands, or they would be in pressure to not do reforms. I mean, this is really going to Damien also, because you were explaining this, that maybe you have an idea about what you think about this comment that we have there. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was just noting down. So first of all, I think obviously today to take Italy as an example is makes sense. Yeah? But on any other day, I wouldn't like that, because it's a German and Dutch reflex to go for Italy. Whereas if you actually look at the implementation, Germany is probably amongst the worst countries when you look at the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. Why? Because and we talked about this already, about the fact that when it comes to reforms, none of the country-specific recommendations were implemented diligently, and that doesn't matter if you agree with them or not. That was the system that the Germans asked for: no money versus reforms. So the Germans dearly fucked that up. I'm sorry for that. And then when it comes to the spending side, also at that time, all the spending was refinancing of already planned stimulus packages. So what it basically does is a net transfer of German taxpayers' money, taxpayers' debt to European taxpayers' debt without the promised stimulus effect. So I really am not a big fan of the German system there. But to look at the implementation capacity, then maybe in Italy. So why do I believe that the RRF is still a positive instrument when it comes to that? I mean, look at the eco bonus. Yeah, it's probably one of the coolest programs that, if it works and if inflation doesn't completely destroy its purchasing power, if you want, it's a really cool program of hopefully helping Italian household owners to do the necessary improvements in terms of primary energy reductions. And it also, the way the RRF works, should show at least that you have really done these renovations before you can, as a member state, as Italy in this case, get the funds. So like the overall setup isn't so bad, and it really fosters, I think, a positive kind of implementation mentality. And the Italian experts I talked to were all completely stressed at that time, because Italy hadn't done such large investment programs for quite a while, which really meant that a lot of capacity had to be built. So there is a positive implementation effect actually by setting up this money. And then this is only looking at the investment side. If you look at the reform side, obviously the reforms are exactly guided towards increasing the implementation facility and capacity. So Draghi's easing of permits and so on, that's all falls under this kind of category of improving implementation, and that's good. So does it mean that the European Union can solve the member states' issues or the national political kind of context? No. I mean, in the end, obviously, we can only try to ensure that European money is spent correctly. And yesterday we had a meeting on fraud and control with the European Commission and Europol and Olaf in camera, so not public. But we can try to push in that direction with these reforms. So I really hope that this is clear and that Italy is not the bad child in this context. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we focus a lot on Italy, but sometimes it's just because it's bigger and more visible and historical, but not necessarily because it is the one with more problems of the countries in the EU. In any case, I see here that there is a question is in the question and answers chat. I would prefer people to use questions and answers rather than the normal chat, but well, I see another one going to the normal chat. Anyway, but let's go with the one in the questions and answers. And I see, Daniel, you seem to have volunteered to answer the question by Helmut from Glasenapp about the energy transition and the new infrastructures and building materials lacking, etc. So you wanted to answer, apparently. Is this true?
Yeah, I tried to answer it in written form, but somehow it didn't work. I don't know.
It doesn't matter. You can do it live. It's nicer. So
first, just to what Damien said about Italy. I mean, I wouldn't take the Spiegel as, as the. I'm myself more critical about the Italian situation. I don't want to discount what Draghi has tried to do, but my view is that his wager was, I let the fiscal situation, basically I buy everybody off and I get reforms. And okay, I'm very skeptical that the reforms are already through. But we have Francesco here, who is a much better expert on Italy, and perhaps he can enlighten us also about actually the mixture of infrastructure spending or public sector investment and current expenditure, which also has, I think, increased. But I leave that Italian discussion to Italy. On the, I think the question in the chat, I think it is a fair point. And that's something I wanted to say earlier. We are at present at the supply limit of what can be done in terms of useful public sector infrastructure. There are supply limits both in terms of what the industry can provide, materials, and supply limits in the sense of, I think Damien also mentioned that, the capacity of public authorities actually to do tenders, plan infrastructure, and make sure that the money is well spent as opposed to spent. And we know that in Germany, for example, that capacity had been reduced a lot. It's now coming back slowly, but again, slowly because there's now a labor market, which is very tight. And I totally agree with Damien also that in Italy, the capacity also had to be built up. I just hope that this capacity will be used wisely by the next government. And that is still open, right? Not so much today. Today is just a symptom of a larger malaise. So coming back on at the European level, that's why I'm saying is we are reaching more or less at the level of public sector investment, which is useful. On the green side, I don't see what else we need in terms of public sector infrastructure. And again, here, I presume Damien will agree that most of the obstacles to a quick increase in renewables are bureaucracy, are NIMBY, not in my backyard. I don't want to have the windmill here. Why not somewhere else in the next neighbors, right? St. Florian's principle is called in German. And I think these are the real obstacles to a quick rollout of renewables in Europe. And that is something where Brussels can do very little, where national governments take a mouthful and promise, but where the implementation is at the grassroots level, right? And that, I think, is an area where I see no progress, because the incentive for any individual initiative to say this particular windmill is whatever, destroys our local environment, the Putin effect there is close to zero. And therefore, I'm very skeptical that we need more money. We would need much more fundamental, detailed reforms of how we deal with public opposition. And there, I think the Danish model is really interesting. and the German minister Habeck is from northern Germany. But you need a German political system. You need, sorry, a Danish political system. You need Danes, right? And you don't have them everywhere. And I think that is the biggest problem for me, not so much the financing of green public sector expenditure.
Yes, thank you. I mean, this is, yeah, I think we have covered. There are similar questions coming. It's a bit about yeah, well, there's a question about permanent fund, but this is something that goes, I mean, it's like for Lalia that we need to improve the use of existing structural investment funds. It is true that there is an issue here. We have to be, I mean, I just want to mention this, when people speak about less bureaucracy, it is interesting that every time you try to put less bureaucracy, then people shout more control. Because the moment you reduce bureaucracy to the use of EU funds, it means you give more power for flexibility to the local funds, and then everybody shouts that you don't have control. And then we go back to bureaucracy, and it's like a constant circle. I think it's inevitable in human society, but it is also to remember that this is an issue. There was, in fact, I think we have issues with supply side on energy efficiency on products and materials, which is not, it's a bit of an issue. It creates also higher costs. I know in Italy, many people are concerned that the costs of doing energy efficiency are going up, and it's not only about energy, it's also materials. They don't have enough people and materials to use the money in time to be able to do the housing thing. So there are issues there that you can see are playing a role, but that's something we have to see, you know, it's markets and movements. I know, Francesco, you wanted to mention something about what Daniel was telling you, given that you're here, and you wanted, he was saying, what do you think about the situation?
No, yeah, in fact, no, I very, very quickly, a couple of comments on Italy, which, however, are, I think, important when we reflect upon creating a new instrument. Well, bearing in mind that the RRF is for capital expenditure, and that's why also Damian correctly says, okay, we have to relaunch investment. The problem that Italy is currently having is a threefold nature. One has been mentioned actually by Daniel, and is regulatory. So it's a distribution of competence across different governance levels, from local authorities, regional authorities, because when you have to construct a high-speed train, you have to pass through different territories, and no one wants the high-speed train close to his own door. And this is in part slowing down actually permissions and therefore the implementation of the investment itself. And it's also not only about permission, it's also about who is supposed to do what. And this is obviously slowing down the implementation of investment. The second problem is about current expenditure, because exactly the RRF is paying for the investment in infrastructure, but someone has to pay also for the maintaining and the running of the infrastructure. And there are actually where, especially local authorities, which are already lagging behind in the south, are a little bit more reluctant in taking over some investment, because they are actually not able to maintain these investments. So it's not just putting more money that you are going to improve the situation of disadvantaged territories. And the other big problem is, and there is where I'm skeptical about recreating, and that's where I see the difficulties of Repower EU, is about timing. And timing when it comes to investment, especially for countries, and I like the slide that Damian presented on the trend in public investment over the past 10 years. For countries that have been actually underinvesting for 10 years, all of a sudden the inflow of public investment that the RRF is bringing is creating some problem that derive from the fact that there are technical experts shortages in the public administration to present programs. So there actually my question also to Damian and the other speaker, whether we really need now a new fund to to boost public investment, or to maintain public investment, where we are still lagging behind in the implementation of the RRFs. It's not by chance that Italy has put all the reforms ahead before, implementing the investment. And this is a little bit of concern. And then the other maybe question for Lalia, just to stimulate the debate, and also to Damian and Daniel. We want to boost investment that goes to the renewable sector. So let's imagine that there is not actual need for, there is actual need for public investment. So it's not just private investment, but let's imagine we really need public investment for the green transition. Actually, what we are seeing today in terms of how we use the EU budget is that all the CAP money, so the Common Agricultural Policy money, have been a little bit redirected to support the farmers. And the big debate today is whether all the objectives of the Farm to Fork strategy and the Green New Deal will be respected, because today actually what the Commission is discussing is, okay, are we allowing member states to use the agricultural money to support actually farmers because of the fuel prices crisis and so the fuel shortages and the rising in prices. So we have to support this sector, which is actually suffering from this crisis, but are we at the same time meeting the green standard? So I would like just to raise these couple of points, because I think they're kind of important when we discuss about how to use the EU budget to respond to this crisis. The CAP has been redirected at the moment, but at the same time, we're missing the green objectives in doing that. So maybe for Damian, Lalia.
Maybe you can start. Well, okay, Damian and then Lalia.
Well, either way, that's fine.
Yeah, well, or Lalia.
Go ahead, Damian. No, go ahead. We'll talk later.
I'll be super quick. So first of all, I think, look, what I'm trying to say, maybe, and I didn't say it clearly enough, I think that we are facing a much harsher downside scenario than we are talking about. And then this, do we really need something? It turns into, oh my God, what do we do? And if you actually talk to chief economists of banks at the moment, which I from time to time enjoy, then you see that if you look at their scenario planning, their base scenario is really negative, and their bearish scenarios are really quite bad. Yeah. So this is the context in which I'm thinking. And when you think about, shouldn't we first let the RRF money be spent? The RRF money is committed. This is not creating more or less fiscal space. The RRF money is already, created for it should at least to an extent match the projects that are being financed with it. I know that's not one-on-one the same, but the costing was made, and so the RRF money should be more or less committed. So if you want to create fiscal space, yes, you need to refinance certain things, or certain investments. On the CAP, I'm not an expert on CAP, but I think what's worrying is this trend to say, look, we are in a crisis. That's why now we don't do the things that we need to do when it comes to biodiversity, when it comes to climate change. Whereas I think this is also, since we have to reshuffle how we do things, is always a bit of a chance to do them better. There was the slogan from the Commission originally, build back better. I think not theirs originally, but anyways. And I think this is also true when it comes to now this situation. We should make strategic investments and not sunk costs into structures or even reforms or laws that don't make sense. Yeah.
Okay, Lalia.
Yeah, I don't know if doing it on the screen. Well, I will try. No, let me say something about the RRF also to contribute to the latest discussion. I think we should not. Well, I think everybody agrees on that. We should not underestimate the still problems of absorption that we will have. And as Damian said, it's already allocated, but we might be we should guarantee that all allocated money will be finally spent. And in this respect, two or three things. I agree with Daniel that we are reaching the limits of supply limits somehow, and there is a lot of obstacles that are purely regulatory. But there is also a problem of skilling, for instance. In some cases, there is also additional money we can put increase the capacity to invest. The same for the public administration. It's, I mean, increasing the capacity at the local, regional level is not only about money, of course. It's not only about putting more money, but it's a bit about creating more staff and more capacity to allocate, to prepare the projects and to execute these projects. And when you look in detail the programs, for instance, in Spain and Italy, there was very few money on that. There was very few money to reinforce the public administration capacity to planify investment. So it's a bit worrying that we have given a lot of money, particularly at the national level, like 1/3 in the case of Spain, and I think Italy is more or less the same. And we haven't given them supplementary public funding to prepare these projects and to implement these projects. So I think there we could have done a bit better than we have done. Then another thing on the RRF is that I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's curious also that at the beginning when we were talking about the RRF, there were these two objectives. No, fiscal stimulus. We want them to spend it quicker than cohesion funding, and structural change with reforms. And my feeling now is that it has become structural change a lot, depending on whether we are able or not, or they are able, member states, to pass the reforms that they have promised to do. But with the fiscal stimulus part, if you look how are we doing now in terms of payments, some member states, in particular the ones that receive not much funding, they're a bit a bit on delay with the first payment request. Of course, in aggregate terms, it's not a problem because the success in terms of fiscal capacity or impact will depend a lot on the big spenders like Italy and Spain mainly. But at the same time, we were saying that one of the advantages of the NGU was the fiscal spillover effect among member states. And when you see all Northern European countries, particularly, that are quite in delay for the submission of the first payment, I also wonder whether this will also have an impact in terms of the impact this year, and the following one will be a bit delayed with respect to the estimations at the beginning. That's just one thought. On CAP, before talking about CAP on cohesion, I react to the comment that was done in the chat. Yeah, as I say, I think that it was. As someone has said, I think Damian, that when there's a kind of, I would not say trade-off, but or perceived trade-off between more flexibility and less control or less conditionality, and sooner or later we'll have to decide how it will be the next cohesion funds in the new MFF. And it's true that there are contradictory views on that. On the one hand, you have people saying we have to go towards a model that resembles more NGU, RRF, like conditionality, performance-based, conditional to reforms. On the other hand, you see that the Commission has taken, more this approach of using cohesion policy in more flexible ways. And when I say flexibility, it's also relaxation of conditionality, because all this care and CRE and these kind of things, it's not only about increasing co-financing, is also about allowing member states to redeploy money and to relax a bit the conditions in terms of minimum funding for green investment or whatever. It seems to me a bit contradictory. We will have to decide whether we want one model or the others. We can't have both, or we have to imagine two different types of dimensions of cohesion policy, one more flexible and the other one more rigid, because in the end, as I was saying a bit before, the RRF, it has become quite rigid. We wanted something very agile, but in the end it's quite rigid because we wanted these conditions and this performance-based system. So yeah, I think it will have to decide a bit which type of model we want. And on CAP, yeah, I'm not an expert on CAP. CAP is an issue in itself. Let me just say, maybe it's a bit politically incorrect or not in this seminar, but it's true that when you work on the EU budget, you always have this perception that CAP is a bit the elephant in the room, actually, and it's apart from the other of the other domains, and it's very much. I mean, in some trends that we see very clearly in other domains like greening, is very much more difficult in CAP to advance on that. I mean, the reaction, I was a bit shocked by what happened some months ago with the reaction around this issue of food security and the problems with the export of grain in Ukraine, in which the very first reaction was to take profit of this, to just dismantle all the food fork for what's the name, fork for well, this is a strategy to farm to fork strategy, and just to reinforce the idea that we need to get autonomous and to guarantee food security in Europe. I mean, for me, it was totally out of touch with the reality. So sometimes, I mean, it's as if the power of certain interest groups is much more powerful in this area, and at the same time, the capacity to explain the big challenges to the broader population is weaker, maybe because it's more technical when we talk about in agriculture. I mean, I don't know, Damian, you're part of the Green Party, but it's true that it's much more difficult to find experts to highlight these challenges of greening the agriculture than challenges of greening mobility or electricity or whatever. And that makes that makes more difficult to pass these messages on how to green CAP, and how to more difficult also to make pressure for that.
I have to sadly leave in 1 second, but if I could react to this, Jorge, I would be happy. I just want to say, I fully agree. And if you actually look at, the issue of water usage and of, agricultural, the part that the role that agriculture plays in when it comes to biodiversity, but also to our carbon footprint, I think it's absolutely certain that there's a huge need, and we don't really have a good answer to that yet. And that is interesting because it's also not Europe focused, but that's a global topic where innovation driven out of Europe actually could really help across the planet there. So I fully agree. I think that there's a bit of a need to push in this direction, but as you know, the political reality is that the people who are sent to the Agri Committee and also the political majorities in this committee are very carefully, I don't know how to say this in a nice way, put. And the same is also true if you want for the other side in the Envy Committee. And so, but since you have a bit of a separation of powers there, it's sometimes difficult to understand that Agri should be the new Envy Committee to a certain extent. So I don't know how to best say this, but it's a bit nerdy. But I do think that this separation of agriculture is one thing and climate change another is really. It's really quite harmful. I have to run now to my next event. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for being here. I would just.
I'm not green. I'm bold. Just to say this.
Well, you're associated with your bold. Yes, I know. But anyway, thanks for participating. Now you have to rush. I just thank you, Devian. Now I just have we have a couple of minutes. I think that this question is interesting. That it was a question about if we can speak a little bit about the support for Ukraine a second, because the EU is reacting very strongly about it. And it has simply the questions, is there a balance and why is Ukraine so important compared to others? Things even to Bosnia and Herzegovina. I just wondered, it's in the questions there, and I think it's good to just, if there is one. I mean, Daniel, why is it so important? Maybe why are we putting so much value on that one and less in others? I don't know. Some people are thinking we go too far. It's just a point that I noticed, but it's just for you to.
The reality is that Russia is potentially a security threat to a number of member states, whereas in Bosnia and Herzegovina, even with Serbia intervening, Serbia never represented a threat to the EU or to member states. That there were innocents being killed, that is true. That is also true that at the time the EU did not really grasp the hour, and there were many shortfallings on the side of the EU and its member states. I totally agree that, but I don't like a lot this "what about the others," right? We have now a clear case of an aggression, a territorial aggression, not a civil war, by one country against another, and a country, Russia, which actually harbors also grudges against some member states, and in general wants to apparently refashion the security order in Europe. And I must say the EU response has been symbolically very strong, but on two counts where it really matters, financial and military support, it has been weak. It has been much stronger than the past. I mean, anything is stronger compared to zero, right? So we have all our, oh, we have done something, right? What a surprise, we are so strong. I totally agree. So the degree of political cohesion has been unprecedented. But in terms of the money we have given to Ukraine, we're falling behind. I just looked at the Commission website. We have given 1.something billion to Ukraine when they need 4 to 5 per month. So that, I think, is woefully inadequate. In terms of military, because what good is it to promise the Ukrainians that they can join the EU when the Russians are taking over their territory, right? And their different member states have been very different, with Eastern European member states much more forthcoming, Germany woefully lagging, and now slowly coming on stream. Again, here, I think a lot more could have been done, but okay, we are where we are. Anyway, I find this European or this Brussels complacency about how big we have been and trend of Ukraine, I think we have been much stronger on words than on actual deeds.
Okay, so this is, we are reaching to the end. It's in a minute it's finished, and I'm going to finish on time. Well, thank you very much for Daniel and Lalia, and also Damian that had to leave, although there is a representative still online, as I can see, one of the extra Damians. So thank you very much to everybody. Thanks, Francesco, for being there. And thanks for everybody to have participated. And have a nice day. And from my side, it's goodbye then. Bye to everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.